available for 1.9. There was a reminder for all the working group leads. Please go ahead and review the priorities. If anything needs to change, please help change it. We still have time before we go into the asynchronous testing. The second reminder is please pick up 3 test cases which needs to be automated, each working group, so that we can make progress in automation of the docs testing. And the third is thank you everyone who actually helped mark green all the features which have been done for 2020. We have already started working on the Istio 2021 roadmap. What I have done, which we have discussed in the working group leads, is I have taken all the spillover work from 2020. They have been added as a draft to 2021. So if you haven't already, any features you think needs to work upon in this year, please add them in the draft of Istio 2021, together with the priority, the stages, the user benefit, and the contributors. So that way, once we are ready in 2 to 3 weeks, we can have it reviewed with the TOC folks. That's it from me. Any questions there? So it's just a reminders. All right, go ahead, Luke. Sorry, Louis.
Okay. Issue health.
That is not for this one.
Okay.
Go ahead, yeah.
Brian, do you want to ping on the release manager expectations?
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look through that doc and see what we had.
All right, we can skip over. All right, so we have the, I guess, Jacob or Sam, do you want to talk about the upgrade working group charter?
Yeah, so we got approval from the environments group as well as test and release. Josh wanted to talk to Neeraj, kind of a little bit more about that. So hopefully they've discussed that.
No, actually I haven't. Is Neeraj back? Neeraj, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay, we'll sync up.
Right.
I think part of it also is, I want to know, is this a long-lived working group, or is this more like a faction that lives long enough for upgrades to be better, and then it just merges back into one of the existing working groups?
Yeah, so at least in the charter, I guess one of our goals is we're not sure when, hopefully, within 2 releases to get merged back into environments. That is the expectation. But obviously, if there are other concerns, then or if people think that it is a worthwhile endeavor, then I'm imagining we could live long.
Frankly, my other concern is just whether we have enough people working in this working group. So that's what I wanted to talk to Neeraj about.
Okay. Well, we got that conversation offline.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I guess one question I have is for the 1.9 work item. It would be great if we can link up to the issues, or maybe have a umbrella work item. So for instance, Eric and I have been having discussions on how we can help as part of 1.9 effort. So we try to link issues that we are going to, Eric is going to help us on from the scenarios that matters most to us. So I noticed there's a lot of issue. I shouldn't say issue. There's a lot of items for 1.9. It would be great to actually have a good understanding of, what are the GitHub issues related to these. Are these still planned for 1.9, given, where 1.9 is?
Okay, yeah, that is an action item that I can bring up and try to have something a little bit more formal.
Thanks so much.
So Shraddha, I missed the first few minutes of the meeting. So 1.9, we are still going with the original plan. Is that the thought process? Because I'm guessing we lost a fair amount of time during the holidays. So are we still pushing for the same date? Are we gonna postpone things, or is it too early to tell?
Neeraj, is this a question for the Istio 1.9 release date?
Uh-huh.
So I haven't heard from the working group leads yet if there is any issues, but I will check this Tuesday in the meeting. I haven't heard because I think it's too early. We just came back. It's too early to do the analysis and make sure that we are on track.
All right.
Jacob, we'll talk about supported versions.
Yeah, so this hasn't been raised. Unfortunately, I didn't talk about this in environments, but typically we bump up the Kubernetes supported versions. So 1.8 supported 1.16 through 1.19. 1.20 was released in December, so I'm just looking for verification that we are intending to support 1.20 as well as 1.17 through it for 1.9. And I can take this back to test and release as well as environments as well.
Well, I think this has obviously been a pretty important topic, right? The project as a whole. Like, we've had questions about this in public forums. Mitch has given a presentation about this. So I guess there's a question. Kubernetes itself adjusted its posture in 2020, right? They went from N-2 to N-3. Anyone else feel free to correct me if I start to be incorrect factually. Which would mean that we would, if we stayed with N-2, we would fall, one of supported Kubernetes release would fall out of the window, which is probably not a good idea for the project.
Another thing I'll just mention is, do any of the major providers support 1.20 right now, GKE or IKS?
I know IBM Cloud does. I'm just looking at it right now.
I was going to say I looked yesterday and I didn't think IBM Cloud did, but I might be wrong.
Right, and that's the other big point that Mitch brought up in his presentation is Kubernetes is the source of truth for Kubernetes, but people are very vendor dependent. Yeah, so there's a question, a fairly, just basing off Kubernetes, right? Should we become N-3? Right, we're still, like, there was a lot of discussion back and forth about LTS and things of that nature. Obviously, going to N-3 is not necessarily solving all those concerns, but it is solving some of those concerns, right?
So when you say N-3, are you talking about which Kubernetes versions we support, or which Istio versions we support?
Which Kubernetes?
Good.
Yeah, and Louis, here I think Jacob wants to clarify both whether we are moving one ahead or not, which is the key question here too. Like, are we going from 1.19 to 1.20?
Yes.
Right. So there's three questions, right? One, do we start to qualify 1.20? Do we drop 1.16? Right, and we can treat those as independent questions. And then what release would we consider to be the sweet spot, right? Which probably is not 1.20, right? So if we were going to do manual qualification or other things that were not automated or repeatable, which release would we recommend be used for manual qualification of anything, or even like day-to-day development work? Are there features in 1.20 that should need to be picked up and supported? And any external pressures on this process, right? I think those are the four items. So we could decide not to do 1.20, right? If it's that fresh. But historically, we have always supported the latest supported Kubernetes release. That would be a break from precedent to not support 1.20. So if we can automate it, right, or at least have some of our automation run against it, I think there's no reason not to say it's supported. But that's a separate question from whether we drop 116.
So Louis, maybe we can pose this to some of the experts here. Has anyone evaluated 120 and know what's in store for us?
So I've attempted to get our CI running in 120 and everything works fine. Like there's no breakages that they made that impact Istio. And there's also nothing in particular that helps Istio that we need to adopt or anything. There is like this minor issue where their pod termination, they have some regression. So it takes super long for pods to terminate and our test timeout. So we're working on getting that fixed before we adopt it in our CI. But fundamentally, there's like it should be fine to support. We just need to make sure that we start testing it.
Sorry, is the fix on our side or on Kubernetes?
No, it's broken in Kubernetes.
So John, I know in 120 there was a lot of work done in the Kubernetes community for dual support for IPv4 and IPv6. Does that impact make our life better, easier or harder? Do you know?
I think it just means that we support less of Kubernetes than we did previously.
Okay. So. Because it's actually working now there.
Right, so other than looking at the release notes, right, they obviously did a major overhaul of IPv6 stuff. But it's not clear that that affects us in any way. And they stabilized some APIs that we already had support for, like app protocol things. Which I don't think are that impactful for us either, or that they don't really represent a change. So it sounds like getting the automation working is just the major thing here. Unless anybody else sees something in the release notes that piques their interest.
Well, normally we do the long running test against all the releases that we support as well. And that might be a problem if no vendors have a 1.20 available to run the long running against. I don't know if the long running will run against kind.
It's a good question. I don't necessarily know if we have to answer that now or even, so we could choose to refine that, right? So there was I brought up the point of sweet spot testing, right? Where if, yes, clearly I think we would like the long running tests to run against every known supported release. But we don't necessarily have to have an answer for that question until closer to the release date, right?
I would agree. I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, I think the more pressing question is what to do about 116.
I mean, it looks like when we were discussing the Kubernetes version matrix last time, we weren't sure if increasing this support is necessarily going to help our cause. Or maybe I'm misplacing my facts here. Can somebody remind me? Will this help if we make it 4 going forward and then maybe 5 going forward?
So the only signal that we got in the fall was around what users are currently doing. We did not see users currently running older versions than were supported with their particular version of Istio.
I see.
Right, but they were running there were a non-trivial number of users running older versions of Istio, possibly anchored because they were using an older version of Kubernetes and weren't willing to upgrade it.
That is a possibility. That you really can't distinguish that in the data set that we gathered.
So,
John, John, how hard is it to maintain these older versions, or N-4? What are your thoughts?
It's not too hard until it's hard.
Yeah.
Like if there's nothing going on, it's super easy. It is literally 0 time. I mean, other than the test runs,
right.
but that doesn't really impact anything. But then if we decide that we need some feature that's only supported in 117 plus at some point, then it could become extremely hard.
How if we say N-4, how hard is it to change that later if we run into something really difficult?
Well,
if we don't, sorry,
Josh,
yeah,
I
if we
don't-
don't give a general policy of n-4,
Yeah.
and we just say for each release we're going to support these versions, it's quite easy
Maybe
because we
maybe
know.
that's what we should do.
But maybe that's not reliable enough for users. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you have a minimum, right, which say we'll be at a minimum n-3, but we might
Right,
be.
and we can always have more. Yeah, that would make me feel more comfortable.
I'm not sure if that really helps. Right, that's.
No, why not? I mean, we can basically say we have a minimum of whatever that number is, and then from there it's best effort. We'll do it if it's cheap.
I will still say though, based on my interaction, I have not heard a customer say, I've been trying to upgrade Istio, but I can't upgrade Istio because I'm stuck on an older version of Kubernetes. Like people don't upgrade Istio
No,
because
we
it
have
is difficult.
Salesforce had that, for instance.
Okay.
I'm sure we could come up with more examples. I don't know how frequent it is, but I definitely have anecdotal evidence for that.
Interesting. Okay.
Right, we certainly have, like, leaving aside the upgrade problem, right, we have customers who aren't trying to upgrade Istio, right? They're happy with their pairing, and they fall out of support faster than they would like, right? That's the reason why Kubernetes went to n-3. It's like, I can't afford to do more than one upgrade a year, right? That problem, or 2 upgrades a year. And so with that policy in place, like, I'm always, for 3 months a year, going to be out of support with Istio, right? Or something of that ilk, right? That's why Kubernetes extended their window.
So there is also the other side of upgrade, which is someone trying to kind of leapfrog several Istio versions, and now they're forced to upgrade their Kubernetes version, which they hadn't planned.
Yeah,
and
it limits the
also,
leapfrogging.
right. Also anecdotal, right? I don't have numbers, but I have spoken with customers that have this problem.
Right, so, I mean, we're already working really hard to try and solve the Istio upgrade problem, right? So even if we can't be Istio more than n-2, right, it's not catastrophic for users because upgrades are safer, easier, right, et cetera, et cetera. I think we'd probably all agree the Kubernetes upgrade and/or support window is less problematic than the Istio upgrade and support window. I guess John just pointed out it's relatively cheap for us right now. Until it isn't, but when it isn't, it hasn't been nearly as bad for us as the Istio upgrades. And also, we're not responsible for Kubernetes upgrades. Like, we don't write that tooling. If that breaks, someone else gets yelled at, not us. Right? So it's definitely cheaper for us. That part is true. And then there's one of the vendors, right? So if most of the vendors, like 70% of their installs are Kubernetes 1.6, right? It doesn't make any sense for the project to drop 1.6 support out aggressively, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with John that it makes sense to make these decisions in an ad hoc manner, that we have a minimum bar that we support for Kubernetes, and at each release, we evaluate how much more than that minimum bar we can support. I think that's going to be great for our users, and it also keeps us from tying the project to a policy that might prevent us from moving forward.
Yeah. Well, do we think there's a reasonable maximum? Like, we probably shouldn't exceed what we had done in previous releases. Like, we wouldn't go back and add another Kubernetes release post facto, right?
Correct.
No. Yeah.
Okay, so I think what we're saying is we will bump, but we should evaluate and if we can, carry 1.16, or at least we should have a positive indication about why we shouldn't carry it.
Do we know if the current vendors or the hosted Kubernetes providers, what's their, where are they at? Are most of them at 116?
I know we already deprecated 116, so it's going to be unsupported in 22 days in our cloud. So we would be very happy with N-3.
Okay.
Do you know that users are going to switch off? I mean, even it is deprecated. Or are they going to...
Well, they wouldn't get the security fixes.
Sure, but that didn't stop anyone in the past. I mean, it's not like many people can.
Then do you enforce an auto upgrade, or do they just fall out of support?
I think they fall out of support. We auto upgrade for fixes, like from 116.15 to 116.16 or 17, but the major ones, they have to click on the button to update, like major, minor.
Okay. All right, so we need an action item to go follow up and see what the vendor states are or are likely to be by the time we hit the release.
Capture some notes.
Yeah, if 116 is in the set that we expect one of the major 4 or 5 vendors to have by the time you release, and the cost is marginal, then we should probably carry it, right? Because Kubernetes itself is carrying it.
Yeah, I think we should support it.
Sounds good.
So Kubernetes supports N-3, which means it's 120 to 117, right? Not 116? Or maybe
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Sorry,
You
yes.
can do better.
My math is terrible. I met once.
I just want to make sure we're on the same page. So essentially, we by default would match what Kubernetes has, but per each release, we could decide, you know, if N-4, which is 116 in this case, is reasonable.
Yes.
So what is the longer term policy? Are we leaving it alone but adding the best effort clause? We can always support more than the minimum.
We can choose to on a release by release basis.
Sounds good.
Could we say for the moment that we're N-3 with an option to be N-4, but not N-5? Just like that.
Well,
until we get until there's some strong indication, right? I mean, we could, but I don't want to generate work for people unnecessarily.
Actually, sorry, are we N-3 right now?
Yes.
Is that what we could? Okay, sounds good. In terms of having a cap,
well, a reasonable way to define the cap is the minimum Kubernetes release supported by one of the major 4 or 5 vendors. Right, so IKS, OpenShift, AKS, EKS, GKE. And use that as the rubric, right? And maybe there's some other thing, but in general, like that's what we would look at by the time of the release. Right, so we can make this decision late, right? Because this is, right, we're not going to use this for manual testing, right? We're only going to use it for any automation.
sorry, so what is the value of having a cap, of putting a cap in the policy?
To exclude, like it just minimizes, like it's some way to cap the supported service, right? If there was a bug in Kubernetes 1.15, say, right? What's the value in supporting it if none of the major 5 vendors support it?
Okay.
Like we can obviously amend that. Like that's a pretty rough rubric, but it seems moderately practical.
So it just means that we're going to support what the vendor support, not necessarily what Kubernetes supports.
No, we're our min bar is what Kubernetes supports.
Well, Kubernetes 1.17 is end of life, the end of the month, right?
Yeah, we always go beyond Kubernetes, right? I think that's what we're saying.
So we're going beyond Kubernetes to what the vendors support, I think. Because
yes.
I will say, I thought Louis was saying we were going to stay with what Kubernetes supports.
Wait,
but that's a different.
Kubernetes was moving strictly to N-3.
But that's only for 19 and above.
Oh, it's forward looking.
Yes.
Okay.
So 1.17 still is end of life the end of this month.
Wow, and they're going to
And
end up like
1.16 is was end of life, I think, in September.
okay. Yeah, then we're still n-2 until 1.9 becomes the tail of n-3, 119, and then we can choose to be 1 and or 2 more than that based on what the vendors have, but it is not guaranteed that any Istio release will do that. But then we'd have to have the policy that the next Istio release could only trim off an optional one added in a prior release by 1, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to upgrade people.
So currently 1.8, when I look at the docs, it says we support 1.16, 1.17, 1.18, 1.19. Right?
That complies with the new policy.
Okay. So Louis was already forward looking.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not inclined to be more than n-4. Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense, but
to set the min bar high, lower than what Kubernetes sets it in any given release. I just don't know if we need to come up with a way to describe the things that are like in that addition. Like, well, we just say that they're supported in the doc. So then, like, it's right. It sounds like we're going to take out 1.16 and we'll be n-4, right? At release 20, 19, 18, and 17.
I don't know if this was a comment from John that we test in 1.15 even. Can we take a more pragmatic approach, and when it's becoming expensive to support a release, we drop it and we just leave it there? I mean, maybe we can say that officially supported it's n-3, but hey, it works with 1.15. If you, for whatever reason, you want to use 1.15.
So I'm like, if we qualify it, right, custom, but if there was a bug in 1.15 that was going to cost a stupid amount to
then we drop it. Then we drop it.
Right, but you said that you supported it, right? And then you said that you dropped it, right? So you can't really, like, that's not what support means. You need to describe it some other way, right?
You have to make
it, but it's not supported.
You have to make the support decision at the time that you release a new minor version of Istio.
Yeah, so
and you're committed to that support for the lifespan of that particular version.
Sure, but support really means security fixes. We are not really doing too many supporty things for all that, or even for newer versions.
It could still happen, right? I just...
That's what pragmatic. I mean, if it's a small effort and doesn't cost us too much, sure. Otherwise, well, sorry.
Right, but support right now means that if there is such a problem, we will absolutely fix it.
Security problem, but not...
We guarantee that we will fix it, right?
And or money back.
No, well, blood, sweat, and tears back, because it's open source, right? Yeah, I just think that's going to be like, I'd rather come up with another term like we qualified it and it's tested.
That's good enough.
But
right, that's exactly what it is.
Questions about it, but we don't guarantee fixes.
And if we do that, if we say it's qualified on 1.15, 1.16, whatever, and then we can say supported on 1.71. I mean, we can be more aggressive with what is supported officially.
Right. Yeah, I think, John, like qualified versus supported is probably the same as what you're saying in the comment. And yeah, I'm fine if we want to qualify 1.15, right? That's totally fine if that helps people, but it's different than supported, right? Supported means something very specific. And Jacob, to answer your question, right? Salesforce mostly self-supports, but they would probably be very happy if things were qualified.
Okay, so what's the summary? It's n-3 at a minimum. Supported n-3 at a minimum. We might go up to n-4 on a case-by-case basis, and we may qualify beyond that, but we wouldn't support. Is that right? Yeah. Okay.
I think so. And when Kubernetes goes to n-3, yes, then we'll be n-3, but that policy will stay the same.
I think I captured it correctly. For a 1.16, we are probably going to drop it, right? Based on this policy.
It will fall into qualified but not supported.
Exactly.
Maybe we just capture that.
I'll write it down. All right.
So we need to define and document. That's right. Yeah.
Who's going to send the PR to update the policy? Jacob, could you do that?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Where do we write this? Is this currently documented?
Good question. I bet
There's a
page.
supported version page off of Istio.io.
Yeah, only on the versions, but not on policy.
Exactly.
Right.
That just lists stuff.
But I think we'll want to update that page probably to say what this is, and then add the qualified releases in there.
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily want to start trying to describe the rules, the policy. I think it's simpler to just say what the supported releases are and say, if you care about these Kubernetes, if you care about over Kubernetes releases, well, here's the ones. We've tested against these ones, but these are now no longer supported. Right? We'll just find some way to describe the meaning without having to describe the rules that we use to generate it.
I agree.
So we actually do document already in release cadence. We document how often release and how often they are supported. It is woefully out of date, so we should probably update it. Like, we could either get rid of it and just say, look on our supported releases page for the supported things, but we might want to actually reword it to be up to date.
Yeah, I mean, right now on the release cadence page even has an LTS section.
Yep.
Okay, that is woefully out of date. Can we add it? Jacob, can you guys take on either getting rid of the release cadence page and just rolling it into the supported releases page?
Sure. I can do that.
Thank you.
Is this approved by the TOC? I think so.
I think so.
I didn't hear any dissents.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks for bringing that up, Jacob. Test Flake dashboard. Sweet.
Cool.
Do we have Christmas lights in there?
Right.
This came up a few weeks ago.
Clearly the top priority.
There were questions about the Test Flake. Am I sharing my screen? Can you guys see that?
Okay, I'll stop.
So there were questions about Test Flakes, and the dashboard was partially functional for several months there. It's back up to speed. It's automatically updating. You can see flakes as of January 5th right now. It does update about once a day. So our flake rate, if we remove the date filter here and look back historically for all time, this chart shows the ratio of PRs which do not experience a flake to those that do experience a flake. And in December, 21% of all PRs experienced at least one test flake. The goal that we had set as a project way back in the code mob days was 5%. We've never actually achieved that goal, but we did get pretty close. In April, we were at just 7.75%. So we do see a decent regression in flakiness, which is borne out by, I think, John Howard's experience and others in the project. We're all seeing flakes a lot more frequently than we'd like to. If we filter by date, which in this page I've filtered it down to December 1 to current, we can see the test suites that are responsible for flakiness. The two themes I'll call out is we see a lot of the multi-cluster suites are creating a decent amount of flakiness right now. This is not a multi-cluster suite here. This is a multi-cluster suite. This is also a multi-cluster suite. The other theme is that telemetry. Here's the telemetry multi-cluster suite. Here's the telemetry non-multi-cluster suite. So those are kind of the two biggest areas of change that I see over the last few months in terms of increase in flakiness. For anyone who is interested in identifying flakes and finding them and root causing them, this section up here gives you a list of recent flakes, the 20 most recent flakes. And if you filter by test name, you can get to the most recent flakes in your test suite. So it's a good launching point for troubleshooting and identifying root causes. And I hope to see us get back down in the 7 to 5 range soon.
This is fantastic. So the link to this dashboard is in the TOC notes?
That's correct. You can also just find it if you use eng.istio.io for anything else, which it's not a super useful site yet. But there's just there's a flake section on the left-hand side in the nav bar.
So I guess this is fantastic. Now my only concern is, like, how do we get this dashboard in front of all the developers on the project? Make sure that they know it exists.
So one more question with that, Josh. Mitch, thank you for picking it up. I know it was down for a while. And so thank you for working on it. Same thing with Josh asked is the maintenance. I know there was a plans of moving that to TNR. Is that still in plans? Is TNR picking it up so that, as Josh said, we can bring it up in front of developers? How is the maintenance plans going on?
So the idea was that I needed to get it back up to functioning before I could hand it off. We've still not really identified a future owner for it. I do have one volunteer from the community who heard about it in the test and release group this week, and he's coming up to speed on operations. Ideally, I'd like to have about 3 of us who are able to help contribute and maintain this, mostly for upkeep, although if there's interest in adding features, there's certainly a good number of features that could be added to make this more useful over time. So I am looking to TNR for a few more volunteers. I know that we're all stretched pretty thin, so I'm hoping to see that happen over the next couple of weeks.
Getting back to Josh's question about how do we get this into developers' faces as part of their normal flow, is there any way to get this, right, even if it's as part of any PR that experiences a flake, right, just have this be a link to the kind of CI feedback section at the bottom of the PR, right? It's not like no one's expecting that it's going to tell you, like, the feedback from the CI system is going to tell you which test flaked you, right? That's fine.
So this system as it is implemented today is completely disconnected from PROW. It reads PROW's output on a periodic basis. Currently it's at once every 24 hours. The EngProd team had committed to integrating this with PROW, and then our EngProd representative left the team. And I believe the commitment left with him.
Okay.
So that's what would be needed. We would need to reach out to EngProd and have them integrate this into the PROW flow for it to show up in our pull requests.
So I think though before that, right? The person that experiences the flake is not actually the person that, or the people that should be fixing the flakes, right? So for example,
right.
I guess unfortunately here, telemetry has lots of flakes. So I think it's really up to the people that maintain these subsystems to know about this dashboard and go there, not so much the people experiencing the flakes. So we should just find some other way of
the other is just make it part of the standing agenda of the working group leads meeting. Like, if the flake rate goes up, right, it's affecting people's productivity very clearly, and the lead should be motivated to wind that back down.
I'd be happy to do that. I review this once a month as it is with the test and release group. Obviously, we've missed the last few months because the data was not up to speed.
Yeah, so I think it's both ways, right? If I'm submitting a PR, when the test fails, let's say we have 10 tests, when 3 of the test suite fails, it would be super valuable for me to know, 2 out of them fail because of flakes. So if I don't own those tests, I don't even want to look at them. And then if this one is a valid failure, I could actually look into the logs to see how my PR could introduce that. Because today I don't have that knowledge. What I do is I retest and then see if the same tests come back, right? Because why would I spend time to look at the logs when I can just spend 1 second to have the CI system retest everything for me?
And I think part of the problem is that you don't know if the test is flaky until you rerun it and it passes. Otherwise, it could just be your PR is bad and making the test fail. And what you are doing also by retesting it, I'm not saying you shouldn't do this, and I think everyone, including myself, does, but that's part of the reason why we have flaky tests, because someone submits a PR and they're introducing a new flaky aspect and it fails and they retest it and then it passes and merges. So it's a complicated problem.
So retest is the best practice today because that's the only way we know it's a flake.
So I think that when we have a flake, we should open up, and we do a decent job of this. Like if the foobar test fails, and it's not your fault, and it passes again, when you try it, we should open an issue that says foobar test is flaky, try and find out who owns that test. And then when you see a failure on your PR that you don't expect is yours, you should search the issues. And if that one has an open issue that this is a known flaky test, it's probably fine to retest it. If not, then you should look at either did my PR cause it, or maybe I should open an issue that this is flaky so that we can resolve this. Now, maybe some of that could be automated, but I think that's kind of at least to some extent, what should be going on, whether it's by human action or bot action.
So there's a question of investment here that I want to get into a little bit, which is what's cheaper? Like doing a whole bunch of automation around that process that John just described, or having no flakes?
I would not invest time in automation, just being honest. Previously, whenever we have done that, you end up just creating a huge amount of issues, and nobody looks at them because that automation can't differentiate things enough. So I would rather have no flakes and agree on developers being nice citizens and actually following a simple process. Search, if you don't have an issue, file an issue.
Yeah, no flakes is definitely the best scenario. Nobody needs to waste time. It's the best.
Also, no bugs. Then we can just get rid of the test system.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out is that previously when we had a bunch of flakes, it was because we had bad tests or bad infrastructure. Recently, a lot of these test failures are from real bugs in the code. So all of these unit test failures, I think they're all related to a bug, actually a collection of bugs we just fixed. And the multi-cluster ones, most of them are a bug in Envoy. So this is actually, in some ways, a good thing. Like these tests are helping us find extremely subtle bugs. Like these are incredibly obscure bugs that occur 1 out of 10,000 times. And so it's actually a good thing that we're finding them. Although, I mean, it does hinder other developers, but I think in the long run, like we shouldn't just ignore them. We need to understand the root causes and fix them because these are providing valuable insight.
I do also want to call out that oftentimes the root cause of a given set of flakiness does not necessarily belong to the team that owns the suite. So I know that Doug looked a little bit at the integ or in the telemetry failures, and he seemed to think that there was some sort of underlying infrastructure problem associated with them. So while we do rely on the working groups to at least begin troubleshooting and identifying a root cause, responsibility will probably pass off from one work group to another as we get a detailed understanding of the root cause.
Sure.
Yeah, makes sense. So Mitch, I have a quick question. Maybe I'm not interpreting the data correctly. It sounds like in January 2021, the flakes is gone down to from, gosh, it's much higher to a much lower number. Is this nice to tell us?
My guess on that is that it's simply noise in the signal. One thing that I do remember experiencing back in 2019 when we had a very big problem with flakes is that running more tests concurrently tends to cause a higher rate of flakiness. I don't know if that's the case today. I can't prove that today, but given that this dashboard is updated through January 5th, and January 5th was the first workday of the new year for Googlers and the second for, I think, most other people. I think that's what we're seeing. We should see in another week, if it's still really low, then I would be happy to wave a very mysterious victory flag where we fix flakiness without trying. Or maybe
Mitch, that may have a role in it, but we made a bunch of changes to the test. We fixed. I'm very confident that the majority of the unit test flakes are fixed. I'm close to having it set up where it's just running the unit test in a loop overnight, and so far it's going pretty well for the test now. Steven and Doug also made some big fixes. Like the multi-cluster one, we used to run 5 clusters, and now we run 3, so there's 3/5 as many opportunities to flake, for example. So we've made real improvements as well. But also, like, the sample size is kind of low for January, so who knows what will happen. Hopefully it
is. I would love to be able to get something that shows a day-by-day flakiness rate for people like John who are actively working on flakiness of various suites, to be able to see their results in more real time. The month-to-month granularity is not ideal, but again, we don't have any hours allocated to that in the coming months.
Okay. So we do, if you go on the TOC, I posted a link. There's a spreadsheet that I periodically update, which is looking at something that's a different metric, but similar, which is the number of post-submit jobs that succeeded for PR. And so that we have, per merge pull request granularity. But it's measuring something different, because in your case, this dashboard only shows a pull request that's not merged that fails and then passes, whereas the other case is just running the test once. And if it fails, it's marked as failed. If it passes, marked as passed.
Yeah.
So, Mitch, I mean, this information is obviously great. I think the real AI action item here is to somehow surface this maybe in the working group leads meeting periodically. I think the other thing is just some education around how we can file bugs and not ignore and just rerun the test until your test passes and PRs merge, right? Anything else that we need to do now?
I mean, I'm thinking out loud here. Like, what about? I mean, there's also this idea I think Louis was bringing up earlier of trying to incorporate into pull request reviews. So that would be great avenue to explore. I could imagine doing a kind of a sometimes I think GitHub does this, but there are tools that try to So when GitHub tries to automatically suggest reviewers for a PR, they look at the last person who touched that code. Potentially we start paying the last person that touched the code when there's a flake. I don't know. It seems flawed, but something along those lines.
For the moment,
wasn't there a Google project for that? Sorry, I remember reading a Google paper, Hazard something about it.
It's all kinds of things. Google has all kinds of stuff for this internally. For the moment, right now, I would rather, I think, rather than diluting the effort, just focus on, let's just deflake as aggressively as we can.
Sure.
So the other stuff is quite expensive to implement, and yeah, if we can stay under a very low percentage of flakes, then it probably has almost no value. Relative to that.
For my part, I'm not seeing any lack of ownership from the various working groups. I don't think that that's a problem that we need to troubleshoot today.
Cool.
I'd like to think that what we've had over the last quarter was a lack of visibility, and I hope that this contributes to improving that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so just putting it on the agenda for the working group leads is like, hey, let's look at the flakes for last month. Oh, like Houston, we have a problem. Okay.
I don't know if I agree. I mean, I don't want to throw other people under the bus, but to me, there's no visibility issue. Every time you submit a PR, you see a test fail, and you retest it and ignore it, right? You see it clearly, and there's just a very small subset of people that actually do something about it, is the reality. And I think,
but John, they might not
time to fix it,
right? They might not have the expertise or the time to understand, okay, is this a flake, or I can just do a retest and get away from it. Right?
If you retest it, then that means it's a flake, right? If there's a failure, it's either a flake or your code's bad. So either way, you are ignoring a flake or fixing the flake or you're fixing your code. So
We
Yeah,
still
so
need to get
want-
more people focused on the problem.
yeah.
Right. If we can get to the point where we like instantaneously have low flakes, then we want to shift the developer practice, which is if you see a failure in a test that's not yours, you go and escalate to the person who owns the test. Right. And you don't try and submit your PR past it necessarily, right? But you do actually start to block a bit. Right? That is more normal. Right. If you have very low percentage of flakes, that's what you actually do. Now we'll have to see, like, because we can obviously just change the CI to say, look,
I love that, John. Sorry, that's hardcore. Sorry, Louis. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah,
Not today.
I mean,
obviously.
What we could do is we could have a window where we remove retest, and then maybe when we get closer to the release, we restore it.
Well, we could say if your tests have failed, please go and follow the owners of these tests. Right, so we start to prod, but yeah, I at some point, yes, we're.
I'm not joking. I really like John's idea. Sorry,
I mean, we normally, I mean, at Aspermesh also, we have this policy, if there's flakiness, you remove it. But given that in Istio right now, we struggle to get quality tests to begin with, and lack of new tests coming, I think if we start removing them.
Right. I understand, like, this is not going to happen overnight, right? And I understand that there's a middle ground between these two things, right? But we want to get to the point that the first, like, we can obviously keep retest, but we want to get to the point, if you see a flake, right, we want the default behavior to be, okay, I'm going to go and harass the person who owns the test, right? You cost me time and effort. Please go fix your stuff, right? Become the nag that you want, right? And then, like, but if 10% of tests are flake, you can't follow up with 10% of test owners, right? But if it's one test, you can.
What if for like 1 week for every release, we remove retest just to raise awareness?
Right before the release.
Not right before the release.
Let's let the working group lead process kick in, and let's let them have an objective, right? That's the right forum to take ownership. Ownership, as John mentioned, is the thing we need to work on first. And then, yeah, maybe once we've done that, then by all means, we can start to have all kinds of behavioral, nudges.
So I do have one question about the objective itself. When we did the CodeMob thing back in 2019, we set an objective of 5% or fewer of PRs experience a test flake. That sounds really great, but we've never actually achieved that in the history of the project. Like, since we started using Prow to run tests, which is as far back as this data runs, we've never had that high or low a level of flakiness, rather. Do we want to adjust that goal and have it be the advantage of adjusting it? I think is we can say, hey, if we're above, pick an arbitrary number, so let's say 10% of PRs are experiencing a flake, maybe we need to double down our efforts on minimizing flakiness. Maybe we need a little bit more of a, hey, work group leads, no, we should deprioritize some other work so that we can get these flakes fixed. Whereas if we're under 10%, maybe that's acceptable.
10%, no, I don't think, like, 10% is really high.
I mean, the number of months we've been under 10%, I think is...
No, I agree. I'm just saying, I don't think we want to change the goal.
Okay.
Well, you could have a incremental go, get to 10% and then just make it better.
Right. So having a goal for 199 to be under 5% of test flakes, and using the working group leads meeting as the vehicle to hold ourselves accountable for that, and raising that to the TOC if there's an issue, seems perfectly reasonable, right? Now that we have visibility, right? Because we didn't have good. John had visibility by other means. But yeah, and it sounds like a lot of effort has gone in already in this month to deflaking a bunch of stuff. So, like, that goal might actually be achievable. That's no reason not to shoot for it, right?
Okay, it's like that's Doug's this year's objective. He's already taken care of 10 of them.
Yeah, like obviously, Doug, I agree. There are issues with distributed ownership, right? I mean, that's why we want to bring them into these forums, right, where the leads come together, or the TOC, right, so that we can wrangle those things. If there's a thorny, flaky issue that requires multiple owners, then that's the right forum, and we should decide that. And this tool provides the right kind of insight for that, right?
Yeah, I guess my point is that it's easy to say, hey, there's a flake, can you go fix this for me? But it'd be awesome if people could start to figure out why the flake was there themselves, and so that they have the knowledge to fix tests too. I mean, it's not quicker necessarily to always ask me to fix a test, right?
Oh yeah.
So that's. But
on the other hand, if there are 15 flakes, right, people are just going to fail, right? If there's one, then that's maybe feasible. Right, it's kind of the difference between a known issue, a focused issue, and a wall of noise. I guess the other thing is, are there improvements we could make in the test pipeline so PRs that introduce flaky tests don't get in?
Like, so how do you know that?
Yeah, if they're flaky, you might miss it. You'd have to run it a bunch of times.
No, I mean, that's, yes. Like,
you might miss it. We can develop a system, like this system does not have any false positives. It does have false negatives. So we could write a system that says, hey, if we observed a flake in your tests that we've never observed before, or maybe we just haven't observed in the last 10 days, maybe we need to block your PR until that flakiness is resolved.
I think it's a lot more subtle, though. Often a flake happens one every 100 times. So your PR introduces it. It's certainly not going to fail unless you're extremely unlikely. Yeah, I thought about that a lot, Louis, actually. I think for unit tests, it's pretty simple, because in unit tests, you can run it in a loop 1,000 times in a minute and get results. For integration tests, you could do the same. It would just take a lot longer. So I think, yes, it would be useful, but it's not a trivial problem, but could be useful.
What about a variant?
Raj was referring to, there was a paper by Google which tries to root cause.
Yeah, I think there's some fuzzing prior art here too.
Well, the root causing thing was just looking at PR history and test results, and just doing correlations.
Yeah.
Like,
so
by suspects.
John's thing about, sorry, go ahead, Louis. I'll let you finish.
Right. I mean, one thing at Google that we do is, you can indicate that a test is sensitive or potentially flaky because it's doing something big and nebulous. And so the test infrastructure just runs it a bunch. Even if it's large, it'll run it a bunch. Right, obviously it's not going to catch the 1 in 100, but it will catch the 1 in 3 or the 1 in 5.
So John's joke, which I took as a real suggestion and loved, this just remove retest. I wonder if a variant of that might actually work, which is you can only retest so many times.
Well, again, that
we have a retest currency. Like you can win retest points, and if you buy enough gas, you get more.
A retest market. Yeah, 1 retest per fixed flake, or n retest per fixed flake.
Don't forget many failures are because of bugs in your own code. So that's part of testing, to find bugs in your code, not.
I will say that some of it's very hard, though. Like a lot of the multi-cluster flakes are due to major issues with multi-cluster that one person can't just reasonably fix, and it would also suck to turn off all the multi-cluster tests entirely. So we're just kind of stuck in a medium-term crappy state where the multi-cluster tests are kind of flaky.
Okay.
I think we are good with this topic for now. The AIs we have are good.
The one thing, right? We have a goal, we have visibility, and we have a forum for accountability.
Yep.
We'll save the retest Coinbase market for later.
Agreed.
I think we are out of time. Was there anything else?
Well, so Louis, the only thing is the documentation work group update.
I understand. Unfortunately, and I do have to run. I have a hard
That's
stop.
okay. We can talk about next time.
Yeah, it is an important topic, though. I agree. Okay, thanks everyone.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Everyone have a good weekend.
Thanks.
See you later.